What's going on, guys? Tim Roswick here from Game Dev Underground, and today we're going to do an interview with Shaddy Safadi from One Pixel Brush, and he has been the art director, and he's done concept art for a lot of cool games, including Uncharted, Last of Us, Rise, Son of Rome, Call of Duty, some major titles. He's worked with companies like Activision and Naughty Dog over the years, and his art is kick-ass. So I want to kind of interview him for you guys, share some of his secrets in both the art industry, but also the business side of game development. And hopefully we can all learn a little bit of really cool stuff from him and see what he's about. So let's get into it. Just your journey of like navigating and actually getting a job for one of these companies could be super useful too. Like,
oh, okay, yeah.
Most people don't even know how to do that. They have no clue.
Sure.
So,
well, there was an interview on ArtStation where I talked about like my the sort of school through getting a job version, which is great. But I'll give you the condensed version of it, which is I graduated Art Center College of Design, was kind of not very good because I kind of thought I knew everything. Got a job working in a restaurant in my hometown where I grew up, which was really depressing, and worked on my portfolio for a year. But my learning didn't start till outside of college. I think in college Art Center was, first of all, like a lot of money that my parents paid for. And if I wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have gone there, I don't think. And I actually don't recommend, I think people need to think really carefully if they're going to go to college, especially for art.
I would agree
I think
with you.
maybe for programming that makes a difference, but like no one in almost, in my experience, has ever given one tiny sliver of a shit about your college. You look at your portfolio, and that's the end of it. That is just the end of it. College is a racket mostly, and you can have a teacher here and there. That's great. Art Center had some incredible teachers. I certainly wouldn't know as much as I did if I didn't go there. But I also had rich-ish parents. If you don't have that, then it's outrageous to make your not super rich parents pay $100,000 for school. I think that's true in almost any field, unless it's something where the degree is necessary to actually become the thing, like a doctor or a lawyer or something where like
totally.
Or a psychologist. The diploma is absolutely essential, and there's a lot to know. But in art, and this has only changed in the last 5 to 10 years. If you think about a school, they can hire the best person who, one, can afford to not work professionally to get paid what a school pays, which school pays okay, but not enough to compensate someone who's like, Steven Spielberg is not teaching a directing class.
Right.
He doesn't have the time. He doesn't care.
No, but dude, online education, I think, is the future for that kind of stuff, because
it's huge. And plus, in our field, you have the Steven Spielbergs of concept art, like Mckee Kuciara, Maciej Kuciara, and Eitan Zana, and John Sweeney, and Nick Jindro, all these guys on Gumroad that have all these tutorials that they're like the top of their field, and they're teaching it for almost free, like $20 a class.
Compared to college, it's like a no-brainer. Like
compared to $100,000,
dude, I'd pay $500 or $1,000 for a course instead of like a $20,000 semester. Like shit.
Totally.
Yeah.
Exactly. You can go to Concept Design Academy. So, journey-wise, I would say one thing: if you I don't know how it is in programming or game design. I don't know what's relevant. I don't know what programs are really good in game design. I think it's hard to imagine. I know that the game director, let's say, of Last of Us, Neil Druckmann, who went to Carnegie Mellon, and he studied. I'm not exactly sure what he studied, but he got a lot out of it. So I think there's budding game design departments that might be awesome, but I would say really look carefully at what they are before you spend your money. So anyway, worked in a restaurant, got a job in Colorado at a small company. The company was struggling. Then I moved to Naughty Dog, working on a Jak and Daxter game that got canceled a week after I started, and then I jumped on Uncharted, which was a little bit of a struggle because at that time, that kind of game wasn't really like cool. A guy in a t-shirt wasn't cool. You had to have like rocket packs and laser beams and jets and more flamboyant stuff. So that was the era that I entered in the games when games were just starting to try to be movies, but like Uncharted was one of the first games that was like no, but seriously, we're gonna try to be a movie. Like he only has a t-shirt, and so that like ruffled feathers internally, I think, at Naughty Dog and with me personally, because I wanted to design like airships and cool stuff, not a guy with jeans. So there was a really hard transition in games for a lot of people to stop being they don't get to just design as much stuff. So you had a lot of people that went to art school and stuff. And when I say design from an art perspective, I mean like designing a ship for Star Wars, where you start with a bunch of different shapes and ideas, and then you pick one that tells the story the best. That's like design on a bigger scale. But concept art now, at least the kind of AAA games we get, it is some design, but a lot of it is like for Last of Us, it's just a matter of like finding the right shot in Philadelphia that looks like a cool street and like adding ivy on it and making it look overgrown. So maybe you're designing the way the ivy is laid out. Maybe you're designing the way the decay is happening to make nice shapes. You're designing where you position the light, but you're not inventing an airship. Do you know what I mean?
So what is your process like then? So like, let's say you're creating a piece of concept art. Do you try and find things in the real world to look at, or do you just come out of your brain? Like
No, in fact, nowadays young concept artists are who don't know this just flounder and struggle. But we base everything in 3D now. So every concept artist that I work with now, all 10, 12, they're like decent at 3D. Like maybe they can, some of them can like UV a model. Some of them could be 3D modelers also. But there's almost not a concept artist that I would work with that doesn't have a basic understanding of 3D. Meaning they can open Modo, throw some cubes around, they can move a few lights around, they can go into DAZ, which is another program where you can buy ready-made characters or posable characters, pose the character exactly how you want, and light it how you want. Even maybe go to another program like some sort of nice lighting program, or there's another program called, what is it called? There's another program that does like fabric dynamics and stuff. So each of these guys knows one or two programs, and we mock up everything in 3D as much as we can. Or we find a great photo to start.
So like literally before you even begin the concept art, you mock up the basic stuff in 3D, like with blocks and shapes and stuff?
Exactly. And that's the perspective drawing too. So there's no more perspective drawing. Like if I was drawing a city, there's no way I would start with a perspective drawing. In fact, a lot of times now we're just flying around Google Earth. Google Earth has 3D
so crazy.
Now.
Dude, let me tell you a crazy story real quick. So I actually went and talked to a counselor at Art Center. I was going to go there. I was like 90% sure I was going to go there. But all of my portfolio was 3D. I had only built stuff in 3D up until that point. And the counselor looks at me and she goes, where's your concept art? Where's your drawings and stuff? I was like, I don't have them. I don't know how to draw. I just go to 3D. And she's like, well, you can't do that without drawing first. You have to have drawings. So you have to learn all that stuff to go to 3D. And I remember leaving there and I was kind of disappointed because I was like, but if I can do 3D, why do I need art? And it's so crazy that you're telling me now the process is completely reversed. Like now you start with 3D and then you go to do the art. That's crazy how times have changed. But
yeah, it is.
The technology is getting so better.
I'll tell you where the drawing comes back in, because it does come back in. So like
enlighten me.
When you draw, like you take figure drawing classes for like years and years when you're in art school, and you start out with all these like fundamentals. Now, if you're just doing the fundamentals and you don't know why you're doing them, they can be kind of useful, but they're not as useful if you understand them. I think the fundamentals, especially drawings particularly, is designs when you draw the figure to learn how to create beautiful shapes.
Right.
So like, for example, if you were drawing a thigh, right, of a woman, this side would be a little straight and this side would have a slight curve that had a swoop to it. And if they were both curved or they were both straight, it wouldn't have energy. It wouldn't have juice. So you draw enough and you start learning what shapes create sexy, juicy looking cool things. The way that translates then is now you have all this art knowledge, this drawing knowledge, and now you're in Modo and you're moving the light, and then the light suddenly makes a shape on the ground that has a curve and a straight that you're like, that's good. The only reason you know that's good is because you also had some
you understand the concepts and stuff.
Yeah, so even though Art Center was like, no, even though 3D is a major component and it's actually easier for me to hire people now that the process has changed, because it would be harder to have a company it would be harder to get young kids to get good fast if we weren't so many cheats, if 3D didn't exist. And there's certain jobs that as a studio we don't get because they require too much specific, like if someone wanted a really specific art style, like let's say anime characters, you have to be really good at drawing, and that's the only way you can do that. Yeah. It's not like you can be kind of good and then also do some 3D and figure out some other stuff and make it happen in the end. The way we do it, you're using so many different things. Not all of them are art-based. Some of them are technical. So if someone can do like 70% of the technical and they're missing the 20% of art, maybe I can help them. Or if they have a good amount of art but they're missing the technical, we can just kind of wedge it all in and fill in the gaps.
So how far in the 3D do you go then? Do you actually go and like texture the models and do high res stuff, or is it just kind of blocky, getting the lighting right, doing all that kind of stuff?
Well, let me see on the website. I think there might be some samples. I'm just going to type in onepixelbrush.com right now. If you go to the site, on the left side, there's these buttons called process buttons, and if you click on them, you can see some of the 3D that was built for some of those images.
Okay, cool.
And if you look at, like, for example, there's a space one kind of farther down, and you see those are all like gray block mesh with a light on it, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it used to be. Now, I think now, like in the last year, we're talking like we're pretty much assigning materials and assigning shaders. We're maybe not UVing the texture. We're not like placing the texture exactly perfectly, but I would say like 3 or 4 of 10 guys can do that.
Wow.
They can like go in and put the texture in kind of where it needs to be. The model doesn't have to be low res or anything, but like for example, one of my artists sent me this like thing that's like a city generator. There's all these cheats too, like this program that like where you can populate cities with buildings. And what we do is we find 3D on Google Warehouse or TurboSquid. And we'll buy, like if we have a giant tractor in the scene and it's a regular tractor, we're just going to buy the tractor. And that tractor's $20.
I have this concept that I tell everybody, outcome over output. Like, so many people get stuck, especially independent game developers when they're doing everything. They get stuck on trying to build the thing or learn the whole way through. And I think the difference between like a business owner and a developer is understanding that it's your end result that matters. It's not the whole... like how, especially in design, like how you end up to what you get. As long as you get the right thing, I think it'd save you a lot of time. It's really cool that you mentioned that too, because that seems to align with
what's
that.
in game design. What is the like premier thing people use to like block out? Let's say you wanted to create just some fun shooting setups. Would you use Unreal? And is that user friendly enough for someone to just mock up their own sort of like shooting setup if they wanted to practice their game design skills, for example?
I think everybody's got their favorites. Unreal's a great one. I think Unity is the big one right now. A lot of people use that, but Unreal...
So Unity is robust enough that people can like use it as a base to make a couple different kinds of games or a lot of different kinds of games?
And Unity has their store, just like you're talking about, where they have a store built in where you can purchase assets. You can actually purchase code and entire sets of like, if you want to make an FPS game, you can purchase like an FPS kit that you can just run and you have like your own FPS game running basically. So
that's cool.
Yeah, that's cool. Really interesting approach to game design, which is interesting.
Yeah, because I think a lot of your people are developing games, so I think that's interesting to think about. I mean, if Unity is the kind of way to go, or Unreal is the way to go to block stuff out, the only thing I would have to contribute to that thought, since I'm in the art side, is there was some levels in Uncharted 2, I remember, where they'd have these setups. I don't know, did you get a chance to play any of the Uncharted games?
I love Uncharted, yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
So there was an Uncharted 2 level, like in the mountains when you're with the Tibetan guy, and there was a setup where a bunch of guys were swarming in, and there's lots of built-in cover. Now the couple interesting things I remember hearing them discuss, and then when I played it, I saw that it came true. Is they were matching the gameplay to the kind of guy he was. So because Drake isn't a superhero, right? He's like a scrappy, figured out, run and gun sort of dude. They were matching gameplay to his personality. And that was a really interesting thing. For example, he only has 6 bullets, and the setup only has, this AK has a few, and this AK has a few. And if you hide in cover for more than 10 seconds, it's triggered for them to throw a grenade. Then you have to jump out of cover and climb up this other thing. And then if you're there for too long, the guys will flank you. So
the logic was based on actually how they play the game, on actually his character.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, they wanted you to feel like an Indiana Jones movie. So the way they got that feeling,
dude,
is to make you always kind of in trouble.
When I played Uncharted 1, I was like, oh my god, this is what Tomb Raider should have been, because I was a huge Tomb Raider fan. And I remember someone saying that the Uncharted guys were inspired a little bit by Tomb Raider. But what was crazy is when I played the reboot of Tomb Raider a few years later, they pretty much copied a ton of stuff from Uncharted. So the Tomb Raider reboot actually got inspiration from Uncharted, which got inspiration from Tomb Raider, which I thought was, I mean, that's a beautiful metaphor for how I think design works, right? Like everybody kind of takes pieces from everybody, and it's this beautiful kind of creation.
Totally, and I think I remember when we were making Uncharted, people were calling it Dude Raider.
Really? So I don't have any internal data on that, but I had heard.
And Uncharted wasn't even like, the game designers there too they play a lot of games too, so that's another thing. So I was saying I was a little more, when I was in college I was more arrogant. I didn't look at other people's stuff as much, and when I got to Naughty Dog, they're always soaking it in. I mean, they're talking a lot of shit too, but they're like looking at everything, talking shit about it, and then understanding it. So like Uncharted, for example, didn't have cover-based shooting until really late in the game, I think a year before shipping.
Wow.
Because some of the designers played Kill Switch, which was this game I think that had like you snapped onto cover, right? That whole snapping on the cover thing. It had lock-on shooting for a while. The game didn't even have free aim shooting. It was just snap lock-on shooting because it was intended originally to be more of a adventure puzzle solving game.
Wow.
It wasn't intended to be, the shooting was a part of it, but like the game director didn't really want it to be a shooting game as much, so they were trying to figure out, well, what's fun? And I think at the end of the day, this is something like the game director of Last of Us 1, Bruce Straley, and he worked on Uncharted 2 as well with Neil. And Amy Hennig, of course, she worked on all of the Uncharteds. One thing they were trying to do is they would play through the whole thing. Bruce was especially, this was kind of his thing. He told me, I'm not a game designer, he's just telling me what he did, what he was going for, is he would kind of play the whole thing and feel what the tempo was. So if we had done a little bit of climbing, he's like, we're ready to shoot now. Like we've been if we're shooting for too long, we're ready for some cutscene or ready for some adventure. So that pacing element of like, some Uncharteds are better than others, and everyone has their thoughts on what parts they like the best. Part of it was just that, like, making Uncharted 2 I thought was really great because it had this really nice pacing. You were doing one thing and then another thing and then a different environment, then you're on a train, then you're in the mountains, and then you're hanging out with a new dude, and it had a rhythm to it. So that besides the fact they're making the actual shooting feel like Indiana Jones by reducing ammo, making guys flank you, tuning how long it takes for a guy to throw a grenade into your area, they also were trying to make it so that it kept moving at a certain pace.
Uncharted was the first game where I really felt like I was playing an interactive experience. Like I felt like I was playing a movie, and I think they did that so well, like in how it worked.
And you kind of didn't want to fast forward the cutscenes. I remember.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting.
I wasn't like trying to skip them, you know.
Yeah, like I know a lot of people that do that, but there's certain games. Last of Us is another great one too. That I was just when I played the first 20 minutes of that, my jaw was just on the floor. Like, what did I just play? I've never played anything like this before. It grabbed me so emotionally. It was so different than like, you know, because I'm a Halo guy. I used to play Halo all the time, but Halo's like,
oh yeah, me too.
I love the shooting, I love the multiplayer, but there's something about the Naughty Dog games, Uncharted and Last of Us, that were really gripping and really, like, they pull you in. So let me ask you this then. How much of those games, or either one, you can pick one, whatever's easier for you to kind of describe, but how much of it was a design process and how much of it was iteration, just, I think we should do that because we played it, or I have this new idea, like late in development?
I'm not sure, because the game designers, you know, and game director would figure that out. I'm not sure how much I can tell you from the beginning conversations of Last of Us, when Neil and Bruce pitched it, and Neil had the story idea that he went around and he pitched to people and the president, and they liked it, and they thought, well, we have the tools to make it. Initially, they thought, well, this game might be too dark for Naughty Dog, you know. Wow, but because we had the systems in place to make Uncharted, and we were looking for a new IP, he kind of stepped up. Neil stepped up and said, hey, I had this IP that I've been working on the side for a long time. He worked on a comic book for it. He just cared about it, and he had he'd read and learned a lot about storytelling, and he pitched this intro scene that was so awesome. And he pitched it to me, pitched it to a bunch of people. It was Joel and Ellie. She gets sick. This doctor comes in and says, you know, we have to put her down. She's got the disease, and then Joel kills the doctor. So it was this like really dramatic, like holy, like what would you do in this situation? And that's it. And it was interesting. He was pitching a game that's going to cost, you know, I don't know how many hundreds of millions, maybe $50, $100 million to make, based on capturing people's heart, like the feeling, the drama. Because it was like when he told it, it was cool, and then it ended, and you're like, oh, I want to play this game, and that's it. Now, the only thing he thought about game design wise, I'm sure he had a lot of ideas. I wouldn't have, because I'm not a game designer like him. But it's not like the game was figured out. In fact, there were a lot of problems because Last of Us doesn't have all the cool mechanics that Uncharted does. So technically, it's a less fun game. You don't have grappling hooks. You're not climbing on stuff. You're not shooting from above. You're not hanging on jeeps. Like, again, the tone of the game, like I was saying in Uncharted, is going to affect the gameplay. Okay, well, so now what do you have? You have walking and shooting, but with way less bullets. So how are you going to make that fun? Well, I remember Bruce Straley saying at some point that the whole crafting system came about because they were just playing the game and were like, this isn't fun enough. This is just a boring Uncharted. So they just thought of stuff. They were like, you need to do more things. Like, so they reduced the ammo, and they had like, the knife that you have to find a couple pieces of knife, and you only have one chance to kill the clickers. And they made resources super duper sparse, so you really had to struggle to find even a bullet. There's guns in the game, but there's probably like 40 bullets in the whole damn game. So again, they were kind of at a crossroads where, we're doing the same thing. We're trying to match the storytelling style and vibe with how it would actually be in the apocalypse, but at the same time, it's not fun enough. And so, what are we going to do? They're just hosed. And then Bruce and Neil and all the game designers sit down and be like, "Shit, we just need to come up with shit." And so they came up with that whole crafting system.
That's insane. Because I know a lot. I did this when I started game development. My first game, Echo 1. I created this 100-page design document, and I designed every single thing that was going to be in the game from start to finish. Like, I wrote an entire novel, and then when I got to developing game, I was like, this sucks. Why did I spend all this time doing? And so for me, like, my time in game development now is to start with something super tiny that's fun. It doesn't even have to make sense. It could be blocks jumping over each other or whatever. And when I start with that, then I'm like, oh, well, this is kind of like, this could be that, or this could be this theme. It could be vampires. It could be dogs, it could be whatever, and I like to work out from that. And I've kind of been like sharing that with a lot of the game developers on there, because I think there's something to be said about that iterative process, especially when you're working with people, right? Like, there's so many things you can discover and add to it. And like Last of Us, I think, is a perfect example. You just mentioned how all of that came about. If they had designed the whole game from the beginning and just started on it and built the thing, I don't think it would have been nearly as good as it was.
Do you think, what's the consensus, do you think, nowadays on having a really formalized design document versus figuring it out as you go?
So that's going to be very different in AAA versus indie. So indie, a lot of us guys are solo. So I actually just did a video 2 days ago on a game design document, and it's 1 page. It's a 1-page game design document. And it basically has stuff like, what's your mantra? Like, what's the one sentence that your game is? What's 3 words that describe it? So like, dark or horror or, enticing or that kind of thing. And just basic stuff. And I think that's great for a solo developer to get on paper. The AAA stuff, when you're dealing with 50, 100 dudes in a room, you've got to have more of a... you got to have your shit together, basically, when all these people are working on all this stuff. So I'm not sure what the consensus is in the industry, but as far as like indies go,
Yeah, I don't want to speak for them, and I wish I knew. I don't think a super formal design document is really a thing on those games, especially when you're working on the next Uncharted. Maybe early on there was like a lot of design documents. I will tell you something that is carefully plotted that I saw, and that's the story is really carefully plotted. So I know a lot of people are. Maybe most of you guys are interested in game design, but if you do want to incorporate a story in your game and you want it to be good, and I think that Last of Us and Uncharted have some of the better stories in games, or some of the best.
Absolutely.
The reason is because Neil and Bruce went to Robert Mckee's workshop. Robert Mckee is a famous screenwriting instructor. He's got a book called Story, easy to remember, and he's got some rules of screenwriting. Doesn't mean you can't break them. I went to his workshop once too, and I've read his book. And it's all about setups and payoffs. It's all about plotting the story. It's about story arcs. It's about beats that happen on different times, and there's a whole hidden structure to the way stories are made. And if you're someone who doesn't know that, you're not going to be able to write a good story, because it's a profession. So the thing I would say to anyone who's interested in like making a game, but also making it have a story, if you're going to write the story, you have to be somewhat of a writer. And in order to do that, I would start with Mckee. I would start with his book, and I would start with understanding how the acts and how the structures of the 3-act structure of a movie is broken down. And I will tell you that on Last of Us and on Uncharted, that story-wise, they're starting with cards, the same way you would plot a film. And it's Act 1, card. Here are the major beats that have to happen.
Yeah, I do something similar with sticky notes. So yeah, that's
right. You put them up on the wall, and with Ellie and Joel, for example, if you know what their journey is going to be, like all the way through, and you have to know what the end is going to be, because she has to start somewhere different. You know, Joel had to start as someone who had his daughter get killed. No spoilers, but that happened in the first game. Had his daughter get killed, and then the whole premise of the game is him learning how to feel feelings again. So that means their journey has to have all these other characters that come in that represent different costs and benefits to that issue that they're fighting over, which is, does it pay to love someone? Is love too dangerous? And they met a guy who was with his son, I think in the middle, these characters in the middle, who his son died and the guy killed himself. So that character was there just to present that argument to the side of what happening in Joel's head. Every character, Tommy, the guy the old guy in the town, all these different people are presenting Joel with arguments of whether or not it's important to care about someone, and whether your life and your safety is more important than loving this person. And if you didn't know that, at a big level, there's a reason you play that game and you're like, I feel things. But it's hidden. The structure is completely hidden from someone who's doesn't understand how writing works. And most people don't. But if you're interested in that, you have to get involved with story and understand the structure.
So how does that relate to something like, are you familiar with Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey?
Yeah.
And all that?
Totally.
So that was something that I learned that I thought was really interesting. But I also noticed that some of my favorite movies break off from that at certain points. They don't quite follow it. Sure. There's twists to it. Is what he teaches in his workshops and stuff, is it a little bit different than that? Is it based on like a template, or is it specific?
Yeah, it's based on a really specific template, okay. And then you're allowed to break it if you know what you're doing.
Right. Like that's the golden rule.
Yeah, he reviews movies on his blog, and he'll say whether he thinks a movie worked or not. He had a little quick review of La La Land, and he didn't think it was great. He thought it was okay, but he didn't, because the actors are so pleasant. But he didn't love it because he felt like you should only break into song when your emotions swell to the point where you can't control them anymore, and then you're like, the hills are alive. Like, that's how he felt a story musical movie should be. So the fact that they're just kind of sitting around and then they just start singing and dancing, he feels like that's a little lackluster. I'm like, okay, he noticed that. I didn't notice that. I didn't care. I didn't love the movie, but like, I didn't notice that stuff. But definitely the structure. There's plenty of people who I've talked to who have said things like, who are writing something like a game idea or something, and they're like, okay, there's this tension there's this romantic thing between these two people, and there's a tension because she doesn't like the dude and he kind of likes her, and that's what happens in the first episode. Cool, right? And I'm like, yeah, cool. Well, what happens in the end? And they're like, oh, well, we don't know what happens in the end yet. We want it to be a surprise, just like how how Game of Thrones constantly surprises you. But I'm like, they know where they're going. They know where they're going. That's why they can make it interesting and make everything pay off in a way that it feels not cheap.
You can add little details that otherwise wouldn't be there that relate to the ending when you work backwards, I guess, when you know the ending.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason Game of Thrones is so amazing, I don't know how everyone feels about Game of Thrones. I assume they think it's the best show in the world. But
let's just assume
let's just assume that. The reason Game of Thrones is so good and so different from like Lost, for example, which was just dicking people around for many seasons and then ended with like they're just thinking of it as they went. It's that you had a show where this guy who looks like a guy who would have created an entire medieval universe for his whole life,
he does.
He made this entire world, and he knows what happens at the end, and he knows so much about what's going to happen in the beginning, middle, and end that he can afford to do. I'm not going to spoil anything. He can afford to kill off people that you would never kill off in a show, because if you're writing it season to season, you would be like, well, we can't just get rid of all these characters. What are we going to do after that? The only way you could do that is if you knew where you were going. So this story plotting thing not to stay sticking on it, but this whole thing, if you have an interest in any kind of storytelling in your game, and you thought of a story that you think is cool about a samurai who lives in ultimate darkness, and it sucks unless you know a little something about how stories are plotted. And it's not that hard. You don't have to be a perfect, like, great at writing dialogue or script writing. You just have to understand plots and how they're supposed to move to pay off for people.
I think Lost and Game of Thrones is probably the best comparison for that ever. Because Lost is just a clusterfuck of all kinds of shit, and then at the end it's just like, what? Yeah, but Game of Thrones is definitely like sequential, and it seems very intentional on the stuff they do.
Yeah, so. I don't feel it's cheap. I don't feel like they do dramatic things, but I never feel like, oh, that's stupid. That would never. It always feels like, oh, whoa, they set that up, and I believe that could have happened.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, and that works for me too, because I'm working on I think this is my first game that's super story based. So and it's a game called Philophobia, which is the fear of love. And it's about a dude that kills himself when his girlfriend breaks up with him, and he goes to hell.
Nice.
And hell is just love. There's hearts, and all the enemies are hearts and everything. So it's crazy, and it's about his personal journey that love is his hell, and he has to kind of go through that and
absolutely
be changed in the end. And I think what you said is perfect. You got to know the ending, because when I started on that game back in the day, it was actually, inspired from a personal story, and I wanted this deep, dark ending. And everything I did in the game was kind of affected by that deep, dark ending. And then when I kind of played it all out, it was like, this doesn't feel right. Like, this doesn't... Like, that's what I want to happen, but it doesn't... When I experience the story, it's like... There's no point to the story, because the dude does something bad and then he's still upset at the end. Like, there's no progression there,
Sure.
So I started
the concept of progression is a story thing that you wouldn't know unless you knew it,
Yeah, and it was funny because you mentioned that, because that's when I started researching story, when I was really designing the art for that game, and I could tell you that it wasn't right, but I didn't know what was wrong with it. Like, this isn't right, and I get that sometimes when I watch certain movies too. I'm like, movie just wasn't. What was wrong with it? I don't know, but it just wasn't there. It didn't have all the pieces.
That's a really powerful core of a story that someone is afraid of love, because it doesn't seem like something that people would be afraid of, but I think that really resonates, especially with dudes.
Yeah, I think.
or anyone who's got a certain history or past or the way they grew up, or they don't know how to connect, and everybody wants love, so everyone can relate to the ending being good. But you're right. If he starts off being afraid of love, he can't end, being a serial killer. Well, he could end being a serial killer. Like, he could never have figured it out. But then we see the consequences of that. Maybe,
Yeah, and I think storytelling, like you said, is really. There are I think every movie, in a way, or every game is it shows us a little piece of ourselves, and it shows us the lessons that we learn along the way. And that's one of the things I loved about Last of Us and Uncharted, is they're very human stories. They're very, like, based in the human psyche and what a person has to go through that isn't necessarily related to the guns and the zombies or whatever. It's a really human thing.
Sure.
And I think most good movies and games and stories, they have that concept about them. There's a metaphor there,
And they're all trying. And that thing that Mckee even puts it even in a more clear focus is, like I was saying, not only is there a thread, not only is there an arc, but every other character is a representation of a perspective on that same message.
That's a really interesting perspective.
And if you watch, like, Inside Out, for example, you'll see that. Like, Inside Out was that Pixar movie about joy and sadness. And
my brother told me that movie was awesome. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet, but it's
great.
And he's 25, and he was like, and I thought that was a kid's movie. He's like, no, it's great. You should watch it.
It's all about feelings and accepting. Yeah, and no spoilers, but it's happiness. It's inside your head, and there's every single thing in your head is a little character that represents an emotion. And joy and sadness get outcast, and they have to get back home through this fantasy world. But with the deep core of the movie that they were figuring out throughout, because joy and sadness are together, and joy's always happy, and sadness is always like... Sadness is played by Phyllis from The Office. Do you remember her?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember Phyllis. She was like, she's like super mopey. In the end, it wasn't that happiness had to vanquish sadness, or beat her, or make her happy. The point in the end was that Joy had to accept that sadness was a part of life.
Wow.
So it was really deep, and there was a scene in the end where, like, you see inside the girl's head with these characters in this fantasy world, and then the real life world. And if you don't accept the feeling that is sadness is a part of a natural part of being a human being, then you can't be a whole person. Now that's a really deep insight that Pete Docter said in a making of that he realized as he was jogging on a hiking trail. They were a year into writing the story without necessarily knowing that was what it was going to be.
That's kind of what happened with Phylophobia too, because when it started the game, I was in a bad place, and that's where the game came from. It was like this horrible feeling of just being lost, and then over time I kind of realized that, like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's why I love iteration. As I think it's a very human thing to kind of develop on, because there's so many things you can't intentionally design like that. You can't always
totally
figure that. So.
And Mckee would always say in his workshops, and he says in his book, is that as you're writing a story, it reveals itself to you. You don't know. You don't sit down and realize this is a story about this. You maybe have a kernel of an idea, but as it evolves, you realize something. And I'm working on a story right now, an animated feature script, and if we change the ending, there's a trickle down effect that changes every single thing that happens in the story.
That's interesting. So, okay, let's switch gears a little bit, because I want to talk about the business side of all this. So,
sure.
When you were growing up, did you always know that you wanted to do concept art? You always want to work with games and stuff, or?
Yeah, concept art kind of came on the scene. I was on vacation with my brother in Europe. We were traveling around, and we were on a train, and I was listening to Eminem. I think we were in Switzerland. Remember Eminem?
Best rapper of all time.
Yeah,
damn
really
straight
is.
I do.
He is the best rapper of all time. Like, I mean, everyone else is fine, but like, he's in his own.
He's on another level, man.
He's in his own level. Yeah, he's in
can't
his own
even
thing.
compete.
No, no one's even close, rapper wise. But you kind of listen to his album once, and then you're like, it's not like an album you listen to while jamming in your car. Like, you don't listen to it in the summer with the windows down. You just like listen to it, and then that's it.
You know how many comic book references are in Rap God? I tried to count one time. It's insane. Anyways.
What were we talking about?
We're talking about your journey. Sorry, as you started on
the business part.
Yeah.
Are we saying that?
So how'd you get involved in concept art? Did you know that?
In school there was it was still kind of Mario Brothers when I was in high school and in college. There wasn't like a dedicated job, but
right.
It was the Sony PlayStation, the first one that came out. Concept art as a job was just starting to be a thing. I wasn't going to be in a concept art. I was going to be in illustration, even when I started art school. Okay. So concept art only came to pass like 3 years into college, when I started to see that maybe there would be a full-time job for someone just to draw stuff that wasn't going to make it into the game. Because that seemed like a waste of money back in the day. Everyone else was creating assets, but a concept artist doesn't create any assets. So I was just around at the right time. That's part of it. Okay. And you read Outliers, that book about like all these famous people, and the point of the book is that they got lucky. Like Bill Gates was like at a school that was one of the only schools in the world that have a workstation, and he snaked in at night, and he got more time on a computer than any person on the planet Earth, because he lived in a rich area with the one school that had the first computer, and that's why he's there. Now, it was his will plus circumstance. I grew up in Silicon Valley. Game Developers Conference happened an hour from my house.
Wow.
And concept art in video games was coming on the scene as I was finishing school, so I just happened to be on this road that has a lot of things that just kind of came together all at the same time. So that's part of it. Plus, I always kind of liked games, but I could have been into art too, into illustration or something else, editorial illustration. But games seemed like a more fun thing to do stuff for. And when by the time I graduated, I was like, oh yeah, definitely concept art. Like that's the jam. That's what I want to do. But I had no idea that it was such a lucrative field. I had no idea people got paid so much. Like, it really turned out to be way better than I expected, because concept art seems like a dream job, and dream jobs should pay shitty and be shitty. You know what I mean?
That's what they tell you, but you know,
yeah, it should be like dance, like ballet or Olympic medalist. You know, you work for 100 years and then fuck it, too bad, you lose. But concept art is really a sweet gig, because you know, in AAA games, everyone makes really decent money. in general, and then and concept art, you just get to come up with the ideas. It's pretty laid back in terms of deadlines because you're only doing concept. You're not doing anything beyond what just the sketches of ideas of stuff. And then when I left Naughty Dog, it wasn't for any reason. I didn't leave because I was like mad at anyone or sick of it. I was just they were just starting Last of Us, and I had done 2 Uncharteds, and I was just tired of going into work.
So let's back up a quick sec. So how did you actually get introduced to Naughty Dog? Like how did that whole thing work?
I was at this other company called Idle Minds in Colorado, and we released a game, and then they were struggling, and so they got rid of a lot of people, and I was one of the remaining people because they needed concept to pitch new ideas to Sony. I went and did, and I had a friend I met at GDC named Richard Lamarchand, who's an awesome dude, and he was just nice to me. And there was art director at the time, Bob Raffi, and they, I think they said, Richard told me they wanted someone to do a concept test, so I did the concept test for Naughty Dog, which was a woman in a jungle, carrying a tiger. I didn't know it was Uncharted, but it was just a test for a jungle-based thing that ended up being Uncharted. And I did it, and I spent 2 weeks on it, and they told me that it wasn't good enough. And so that was it. Yeah, that was it. And then I heard back a week later that they were working on a Jak and Daxter PSP game, and that they would hire me for that because my style was more cartoony. So that's what happened, and that's how I got in on this failed concept test. Good thing I didn't write them an email and be like, I worked on this for 2 weeks. How about you go fuck yourself? Good thing I was like gracious, and you should always obviously remember to be nice to everyone all the time because you never know.
Life lesson right there.
Yeah. So then they brought me on for Jak and Daxter and PSP game, and then a week after I started, they canceled that game, and they said, well, now you're back on the game we wouldn't have hired you for. But you're welcome to not get fired. And I'm like, shit. So I got stuck on Uncharted. I didn't want to work on it. I would never have chosen that game for myself. I didn't enjoy that genre. It was too boring and realistic. There was nothing to design. But years in, I got a taste for it. I saw some great art eventually. Mckee, QCR, one of the great concept artists. He's like the lead designer, one of the lead designers on Ghost in the Shell movie that just came out now, and he's worked with huge films now. But I saw his work, and I thought, oh, there is a way to combine photos with drawing that isn't gross. And that was the thing. We didn't know as a species, concept artist, we didn't know about cheating. We knew you had to draw shit. If you wanted a rock texture, you'd find the right brushes and make it.
Wow. Then
it turned into finding the right photo. Now, it's not about digging for the right photo for a million years. It's about the way you combine the photos, and there's like an overlay mode, a lighten mode. There's like all these modes in Photoshop. There's like hundreds of little things you can do. There's like you could put a slight filter on the photo, like a smart blur that and add it to 20% so that it doesn't look so much like a photo. And then you're using, back to your fundamentals that you learned in art school, your knowledge of traditional painting to understand edges.
Wow.
Because you remembered edges were a thing, like sharp, like maybe in an area where the person's head starts to turn around the back, but this is the focus, but the back isn't, you might soften the edges. This is an oil painting technique. Now, if you were doing a concept art with photos, there's no reason you can't mentally know that from painting and then go in and say, just because I'm adding a photo of hair, I'm going to kind of soften the edges here in the back because that brings focus more to the front. So the problem with concept art in the last 10 years is that you had a bunch of really diehard artists that were purists, and you had a bunch of tech guys that didn't know art.
Yeah,
and
totally.
It took a little while before now everybody's a LeBron. It's like any sport. You used to have Larry. You think Larry Bird could one-on-one with LeBron James? I mean, one is a superhero and the other is just a guy playing basketball at this point. But that's how it is a concept art.
Did that happen, you think, industry-wide? Like everybody's kind of using this technology to embrace it and help it?
No, some people don't embrace it still. Some people think it's bad. I even know other concept studios that think that everything I'm saying is kind of bullshit and that you should hand draw a lot of stuff. And, by the way, I like their shit. Like, their stuff's awesome. I just don't do it, and I do what our clients kind of want. You got to keep, when I'm saying things, they're coming from the perspective of someone, sure, that works on AAA games, but look at what we're working on. If you don't give a shit about Call of Duty, right? If your jam is World of Warcraft, and you love or League of Legends, and you love characters with like huge epic armor and all kinds of cool shit sticking out of them, and like really like flamboyant design stuff, like that isn't often our style. Now, I'm not saying we couldn't do that. I would love a shot to take a World of Warcraft character, World of Warcraft character and stylize it in a way that would make it like how it would look in a film about World of Warcraft, like they did in the movie. Same with League of Legends. Like, there's so much fun to be had in doing that. And there's also games like Overwatch that have a really flamboyant style that, like, every little thing is beautifully designed, in my opinion. Like, all the characters are really interesting, cool, clean designs that look cool.
Do you think designs like that start at the concept stage?
Yeah, for games like Overwatch, they have, I'm sure, I don't know the concept artists there, but I'm sure they have one or two people whose style is just that, and they're really fucking good at it. Whereas if it would be a little bit harder, we have a team of, I think in concept art, there's an occasional Rambo out there, and you got to respect and love him. But we're more like SEAL Team 6. Like, we're all wearing the same outfit, and our job is to take buildings. But I'm not looking for Rambos. I'm looking for just guys that have headsets that can be like, shoot, double tap, and then move to the next room. And that's how we are doing concepts. That's what our clients kind of want. Call of Duty and Uncharted. It doesn't mean it's not creative, but there's a lot more structure and a lot less room for, like, the person's personal style.
It sounds like a better business move too.
Cool image.
Yeah,
what's that?
It sounds like a better business move too. Because I mean, if you're too out there and you have crazy styles, you might land it big and get a good client for that style, but you might not. And
I think you do. I happens to be my taste too, so I'm not like adhering to them. Like, we've done tests before for studios where we have a slightly different philosophy on, like, concept art that gets us fired sometimes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, or not often, but sometimes, or kind of makes us not get jobs, and that is, we know best. I want to know. I want to know every little thing about what the client wants, every little thing, and then after they've told me, I want to tell the artist, and after I told him, I want him to just tell me, this is it, and then I want to be like, okay, I don't want to do anything. I definitely don't want to work. I just want to hand that to the client and be like, hey, my guy who's good said this is it, and I agree. Do you think this is it? And then they're like, cool. We're never trying to be like, we're trying to design a thing. Let's explore like 500 ideas and see which one thinks. You told me what the parameters were. Here is the solution we think works best. Are there other solutions? Possibly. This is the one we think is good. Now, that applies for a lot of things.
It does.
The only time it doesn't apply, maybe, is if you're trying to design something where shape exploration is relevant. Like, maybe you're designing ships for Star Wars, or you're designing dragons, but the dragons can have any number of wings and any number of legs. But if you already know, if you were designing a dragon for Game of Thrones, right? Let's say, for example, well, you know it's not a dragon made of crystals. You know it's not going to have 4 wings, it has to have 2 because it's kind of just dragons. So you might as well spend your time figuring out the nuances, of it. Right. So if we had gotten the job to design the dragon in Game of Thrones, we wouldn't start it with exploration sketches. We know what the dragon we know what it looks like. Unless they asked for it, unless we wanted to, like, try out some different wing designs and some wing shapes. But for me, those dragons look pretty much like how you imagine in your mind a fairy tale dragon to look like, with incredible details. Like, they have these 2, like, little vents on the side of their mouth that, like, come out that look really badass. But partly too is we don't get a lot of asks for just open world, like, try out a bunch of exploring things, because we're an outsourcing studio. Exploration is often better done in-house. Although we're happy to do it, we're kind of on the expensive side. So you might not have a studio that be like, hey, just let's kill 2 weeks trying out sketches. We're more get hired for, like, the finish image.
That makes sense. Before I sold my company, we used to do technology for hire. Basically, we were like startup team for hire. We used to build all kinds of technology, and I found that anytime a client would get involved and they'd want to be like part of this collaborative process of what we were building, it did not turn out as well as when we took all the information from them and then kind of built the best version of what we thought they should have. So I'm 100% with you on that. Like, sometimes there are just little details that, especially someone like yourself that knows what the fuck they're doing, right? Like, sometimes they got to see your vision of it and just accept it or don't accept it, and I think that works better for so many different reasons. Like,
it also saves them money, and I feel like part of that is due to our business, is that we're an outsourcing studio, and if we get it wrong a bunch of times, we're just fired. And like I said, sometimes we've given them our idea and it's totally off what they want, or we're just not getting it, and then we are fired. And that happens once in a while.
How does that work specifically? Like, do they pay you for a concept even if they don't like it, or is it?
Most of the time we might work out a deal. It's happened extremely rarely, but like, yeah, maybe one time ever the client hasn't paid for something in like 6 years.
Okay.
Once ever, they just were like, no, we're not going to pay for it at all.
I would imagine AAA is probably pretty understanding.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of stuff for them. Plus, you wouldn't benefit that much from that. Usually, they'll get a black and white sketch. We have a guarantee, meaning like our first black and white sketch, if you're a new client, is free if you don't like it. So we'll do a black and white comp that's basically exactly what the final's going to be, just lower resolution and in black and white. And if you're a new client, and we give it to them, and if they say, oh my God, this is terrible, then we're like, oh, okay, well, it's on us. Then don't even worry about it. And if they do approve it, then we're like, okay, from now on, we're billing you normally. Because you said yes. You did like the initial, and if later we end up not being able to figure out, that's a responsibility for both of us. But I want people to feel comfortable being able to take that first step without feeling like they have a potential to lose a ton of money.
It's crazy, like, because I know a lot of like the independent developers and stuff that I work with. A lot of them do freelance and stuff too, and a lot of the emails that I get about freelance, because I've run a freelance business, so I help out wherever I can. But they're terrified of these like clients, like, what if I do something for free and they hate it, or what if I do something that they don't pay me? But what I've found is like the more money you make, the less asshole clients you deal with. Like the less all the problem clients seem to be on the bottom end of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that? Okay. So
yeah, 100%.
It's
like
crazy.
All the art directors, I worked with like 5 different leads at Infinity Ward and on Black Ops back in the day, and Naughty Dog and Respawn, and I honestly have never worked with one person who didn't know what they were doing.
That's awesome. So yeah, just work your way up the ladder. The higher you get, the less pain in the ass people are, I guess.
Yeah, but sometimes like now, if we're not big in film, we don't do a lot of film jobs, and so in the world of film, we're not working with like huge people, working with like smaller people sometimes, and sometimes you get nickel and dimed in that regard, a little bit more than the bigger clients. And no, there's business books all about how like if you look at your revenue, you find out that like you have one asshole client that's ruining your life. My cousin actually runs a real estate management company, and he fired one of his clients. This is a client that made him $200,000 a year. One of his clients. He's like doing really well.
Wow.
And he had to fire them because they were too much. They were getting his employees, like he would put an employee on their job, and then that employee would quit, and it happened like 4 times because it couldn't be dealt with.
I read 4 Hour Work Week, and I did the same thing because I had this one client. He read
Work Week.
Dude, that book. Oh my God. Okay, that changed my life because I had this client. He ran a gold investment business. So the average sale of like his was like $50,000 to $100,000 per sale, and these happened multiple times per day. And I was doing the marketing for that end because at that time I ran a marketing company. But the dude was he caused so much anxiety in my life. He would like call me all the time and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And the numbers were insane, but like it was not worth the life impact that he was having on me. So I had to walk away from him. I think firing your clients is a fantastic piece of advice because there's some things that are not worth the money,
Totally. And if you can stomach it, I remember I was on my way to meet some clients one time, and I was thinking about this one dick, and I was thinking to myself, but you know what? Like, he's such a dick that only I can take his money. like no one else is qualified to take this guy's money, and I can. So I'm actually in a very niche market working with this guy. So I thought of it like that, and then and it made me, and it just helped me to power through, and then it ended up calming down later. But like, I
guess it depends on how confident you are in yourself. Like this guy would make me doubt myself so many times. Like, it made me second guess. Like,
freelance is you were in house at the time, right? You were working there.
Well, I was freelance, but I wasn't working with him. Like, I had a company, but the way that he had set it up is I would come into his office like once a week.
Okay. Yeah. See, we're very separated from the teams and stuff and the drama of stuff, which actually is really cool sometimes because we're not involved in the politics.
Oh yeah, no, I love that.
We can be like a fun uncle. Just coming in and being like, oh, what's going on? We're all friends, right? And like, this guy hates this guy, and this guy got a promotion before this guy, and we get to like not be a part of that.
Well, I think the mutual respect comes in.
Well, go ahead.
The mutual respect comes in too at the bigger levels. That's what I'm saying. Like, when you run a company and they run a company, and then you guys got to work together, it's almost like a partnership, like a teamwork. Versus sometimes when you're on the lower end of freelance, they see you as like employees or whatever, and it can kind of be. It can
Yeah,
kind
I
of
think
mess with you a little bit.
it's way harder and more annoying. I remember my first client when I got a job. I said, "Hey, I'm a company now," because at some point I'm like, "Oh, I'm a company," and I was giving just the concepts I got to one artist. It's me and him. It wasn't a company. It was like I get concepts that people ask me to do, and I give it to someone.
There we
And so I
go.
would say, "Hey, I have some guys now." I'm just lying. I have one guy. I have some guys now. Give me some work, and they would say like, "Oh, well, let's see the portfolio of the artist you're gonna give it to. Just make sure we vet him. Like, make sure he's good." And I was like, "Oh no, I'm just gonna no, just give it to me. If you don't like it, it'll be free. But again, we'll do the sketch for free." Because early on there was a legitimacy problem. Like, you're not a
Oh yeah,
thing.
totally.
You're just saying you are. So what if we don't like it? So that kind of stuck till now. Like, clients are not getting involved in the minutia. They just tell me what they want, and then I give them what they want. And if they don't like it, then we're fired.
Well, you
That's
got
fine.
the street cred now. I mean, you point
Yeah,
to
a
your
little,
website, you got Black Ops, you got Last of Us. Like, nobody can even guess you. But I think so. How hard was it to get to that point then? To get
Well,
those
it was
kind of
just an
names under your
accident.
belt?
It would just be like you were hanging out, and it would be like you were like you tried acting and you got a gig, and then you got another gig, and now you're at Jennifer Lawrence's house, and you're like, oh, that's cool. But you just did the thing you were doing, and then more people started asking for it. So I think really focusing on the work, that's all you can do, and being nice to everyone. Those are the only two things you can do. And now, okay, you're not hanging out with like these concept artists. Maybe you have like, now your friends are higher up people. Now when you email someone who's an art director at Ubisoft or something, or someone who's famous, they're like, oh yeah, I know you, but that just happens to be because you got a little bit better. But I didn't like do any outreach or try specifically to know anyone or try to connect with anyone in particular. It's just that I see cool people's work, they see cool people's work, and on Facebook now you have like super famous people like John Park, who's like, working on Avatar. He's like hanging out with James Cameron, posting awesome work, and he's commenting on your photo or liking your stuff and commenting on other people's stuff. The community is like very accessible.
Yeah.
So all you have to do is get good, and then once your painting is good, now all these guys who are also good are like, oh, you're in the club, kind of. So welcome.
Totally. No, I tell people all the time, like, Twitter changed my life because, like, when I read a book and it's awesome, I can tweet the author. Like, right there, I can say, hey, I loved your book. Or I find out what conference he's at and I can go meet him and we can connect that way. Or whatever you do, like, just if you have the balls to reach out to people, everyone's accessible now and you can kind of, it just takes the confidence to do it. So
Totally.
Would you
Especially
say
games?
Yeah, no, it's like you go to somewhere like GDC, you got everybody in one place. Like, everybody's there, so
You can go to their talk and hang out with them after. Yeah.
Would you say consistency and connections are the two things that got you where you were?
Yeah.
Did you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Oh, you're saying consistency, like delivering consistently?
Well, just working on your craft, like building up, just doing.
Oh
it
yeah,
constantly.
yeah, just literally just being good. Yeah, that being
But
good.
you think
And
that
being willing
comes from consistency, right? Like,
Well, I think a huge part of it comes from, because I know people that have been working in this industry as long as me or longer, and who are not good still.
wow, okay.
Or
So why do you think that is?
I don't think it's time. I don't think it's time spent. I think it's just you could spend your whole career working and still suck. I know plenty of people who have been working their whole career, or they graduated with me in my same class. Their work is fucking abysmal. And I know people that graduated from Otis and Art Center, where I saw their portfolio. I know I went to John Sweeney, who's the art director at Naughty Dog, art directing a lot of Last of Us with a bunch of other art directors too. But I saw his graduation show when he graduated, and it wasn't good. It was okay.
So what separates you from them? What's the differentiating factor?
It's really simple. He looked at people who were good, and he tried to copy them. That's what the sucky people won't do. Ironically, the sucky people have more of an ego than the legends. The legends, I've never met a legend of concept art who wasn't like, humbly, they backs out of the room slowly and wants to learn from everyone. And especially being able to copy other people's stuff, just outright, trying to copy their style outright. Because there's this myth in art that everyone has to come up with their own thing, and art is so personal. That's just all ego bullshit. What you have to do is get good. And good is not you. Good is good. Just go for good, and you will come out. You will emerge. You will emerge from being good. But just go for good. And so you had John, who I watched, learn specifically from Eitan exactly, and I would help him too, color and light, how it actually behaves. Why do I like this painting? What's good about it? And how do I copy that person's style? And do they have a Gumroad I can watch their Gumroad tutorial, and then try to do a painting that's similar to it, but maybe not the same. Do another version, but it's kind of so that people, so you post it and people start saying on Facebook, oh my God, that looks like an Aton painting. That's great. That means you're making progress. If your shit looks like Aton's, that's good. And especially it's good for me. I'm biased because I'm looking for Navy SEALs. So as soon as you can pass buds, like, you're in. I don't care that you're Rambo. I just care that you can double tap people and clear rooms. That's what I care about. And that's how I can give you money, so you can do it, so I can give that to the client so they can make their game. So if you're willing to copy other people's style, that's the direct road up the mountain. If you are going to explore and try things and not have a light post of someone else's work that you specifically have no critique on, like, you couldn't imagine doing anything better, then just do that. If you have critiques, then change what you think you want to change. But if you think it's perfect, then do it.
You're preaching to the choir here, too. I just literally made a video, I think last month, about why you should copy other people's work. That was the title of it. And I noticed this with my games specifically, in mobile games, because I wanted to get into mobile games, and I noticed the big trend in mobile games when I got into it was these single mechanic, like, super casual games where it just tap, like Angry Birds kind of style or things like that. And I noticed I just started copying them all and building copies of everything. And I noticed after doing that 10, 20, 30 times, I started to develop not only an understanding of all these different pieces, but I started to develop my own preference, my own little style of how I like games to work, how I like the art style to look. And I never would have been able to do that without copying those pieces and copying the entire products, like, originally. So is that kind of what you're describing about art?
I 100% agree.
You kind of acquire the skills that were needed for that artist just by copying their stuff.
Because you can't imagine a way to make it better, right? If you look at a piece of art where you have no critique of it, it's mind-blowing in your opinion, then you should just go for that, because you actually don't know any more than that person. You have nothing to offer. That person is telling you what's good, and you have nothing more to contribute. So just follow the leader. And then when you get to the top of the mountain where you're as good as them, then you can be like, okay, where to next? I'm going to explore. But at least get high enough that you are good first. At least get high enough so that you're paid. Right? That's what I mean by good. So that you have a professional job at a company you want. And then maybe after that, if you want to explore too, and you're exploring the whole time, by the way. It's not like by copying someone's style you are losing yourself. You still know what you like. If I copied an Aton painting, but I'm really into, like, a different side of setting, or I'm the samurais, I can do his same style and make it a setting, a story about samurais instead of jungles. You can still do your own thing. So
you mentioned getting paid. Let's talk about that real quick. So I think it is super important for any artist, and I say artist meaning both design aspects, but also artists for, like, creator of stories or games or whatever. Any artist should get paid very well for their work, and if you don't get paid, I think you've got some work to do, because you got to get to the point where you do get paid. What do you think of that?
I think it's really early on. It's a little bit hard, but
definitely,
if you think something is going to really benefit your portfolio hugely, there's no professional big company. If anyone has a company, or they're making money, then or they're trying to make money, you shouldn't be an investor in it. You should be getting paid to do the work, for sure.
Right.
If it's like a concept test and it's not paid, then I would do it, right? Because it's a huge. If you really want to work for the studio, they got you by the balls. I mean, LucasArts had an ArtStation test where they got probably 3,000 pieces of concept art because it's Star Wars. Wow. Every big concept artist in the world did. It was like 6 images over a month's high-res, super detailed pieces and loose sketches and everything. It was the most elaborate, like, art test ever. And they ended up hiring art directors and artists from it. But it was off of the love of the brand of Star Wars. But even people who didn't... I still get images from people who did that test, and it's just really cool images for Star Wars. So even if you didn't use it for that, if you still can own it, if you do something for someone without getting paid a lot, then what I would negotiate for is I can use it in my portfolio right away, even if I take your name off of it. That would be a good thing to bargain for. If I was a starting out concept artist and they were going to pay me little, I'd be like, okay, but I get to post it sooner so that I can build up my portfolio. Because that sort of games, when they wait, if they're waiting 4 years every time to come out with a game, they're hoarding all these artists' work, and all these great artists have gotten a lot better, can't show anything for years, sometimes never. Sometimes I've heard it
Wow.
like in-house concept artists are never allowed to show their work, which is smart from the company's perspective because they're fucking you. You know, they're saying you don't get to promote yourself, and nothing you do ever gets to be seen. Therefore, no one will ever try to hire you.
I remember, like, with Destiny 2, I remember there was a concept artist that leaked their... they put their art up on their portfolio, but it was such a leak for the game at that point. They had the artist pull it down, and it caused, like, a crazy thing, and there were Reddit threads about it and all kinds of crazy shit, because, like, the concept art leaked details for the game. I understand why companies do it, but I think absolutely you're right. You should have... don't give anybody indefinite rights to your shit. Like, at least have a time period, but
at least for your own self-promotion, because most contracts we sign, they own the work outright, so you can't use it, you can't sell it or use it for anything else. Most
Really?
contracts are like that. Yeah, they own it. But what is nice to get is be like, I have a thing where I'm trying to, especially with big clients, hey, on the day the game comes out, we could show the work so that we can plan like a marketing helping the game too. Like, let's pimp the game and let's help us and help you. We're going to talk about how awesome this game is while we show our work at the same, while we show our contribution to it at the same time, and you know, give props to the artists too, because I'm not doing the work. You know, the artists are. They're doing the amazing
is that something
job.
you have to negotiate though? Like, they don't bring that up. You have to.
You could negotiate it. There's an unspoken sort of. It's generally cool once the game comes out, but a lot of times, like with Activision, and it's not their fault. They've gone through hell and back. So is Bungie with that situation. Yeah. Any company that's had a major leak like that or had major legal issues, they have teams of lawyers combing through your art to make sure you didn't steal a street sign from like clip art somewhere.
Wow, that's interesting.
So that's important. Like, and that's good on them for doing that, because they don't want to get $1 million lawsuit because, you know, you grabbed a photo, some personal photographer's photo, and put it in your concept art.
Yeah, dude, that's got to be a nightmare. I can only imagine all the licenses and all the different stuff for all these different pieces of.
Yeah, if it's outright, if it's blatantly like super ripped from something. Generally, if it's just like you might have grabbed a texture from here or there somewhere on the internet, you're fine. And if you get it from like CG Textures or some site that's legit, you're fine. Or if you just find a picture and grab a tree from it, you're fine. It's just the stuff where it's where you might have like half your pictures from the photo.
So when you guys, like you said, sometimes you'll buy a tractor, for example. You guys actually have to buy like the full commercial use license and all that.
Yeah, like a lot of that stuff is just a flat rate for something, and how
does that work though? If it's an image though, like if you buy a 3D model and you have an image of it, do you need the license for the full 3D model?
Yeah, I think like I'm not sure how it exactly works, but I know in Google Warehouse it's free, most of it. So if you type in school bus or something in the Google Warehouse and you need a school bus in your concept, it's probably a lot. You can buy a shitty school bus for free and maybe a nice school bus for like $20. And
tip, developers.
We're on the expensive side, not super expensive. We're like medium. We're like as much as like a good concept artist would cost. But yeah, but a lot of times we have the budget on an image to like spend, you know, spend $30, $50 on a 3D model. And if you were doing your own thing, I would say that's super valuable to start collecting that stuff and keeping a library of it. Totally. And especially for things that you see all the time, like a tank or a soldier or you know, things like that you would.
My big issue is always audio, so I have a huge folder of licensed audio that I've purchased from different places and I've had and I've seen places. Yeah, you want to keep files like that. I agree. It's like a toolkit for working on your
totally.
Shit. That's a good tip.
So I got to roll in like 5 minutes, but I just wanted to see if we had any last things.
Yeah, I was just going to get to that because I know we've been on for more than an hour at this point. So, last thing, if you had to start over, completely do everything over, you're 18 years old, heading into college, what would you tell yourself that you know now back then to kind of help you? What would you do different?
Well, we didn't have Facebook, but and all that stuff to the level we have it now. But if I was 18 starting now, and by the way, there's guys that are 18 that are good enough to work professionally. We've hired 20-year-olds before. So number one, I wouldn't go to college for art. So that's number one.
Okay.
That's a waste of money. Number two, I would go to Learn Squared, the Chase School, Gumroad, where Eitan, John, and those guys all have tutorials. If you're in Los Angeles, I would go to Concept Design Academy or Brainstorm School. Gnomon is great, but it's again unless your parents are rich, I wouldn't go there. Otis, I wouldn't go there unless your parents are rich, and Art Center, I wouldn't go there unless your parents are rich. Art Institute, of course, don't go there. School's going out of business mostly, and it's a little bit of a racket. And I hate to say that, I've taught at those schools, and I like the staff at them, and I think that everyone who works there is great, and I think there are teachers there that are outstanding, but $120,000 for college is a fucking joke. It's a fucking joke. It's a travesty. And if you're going to go study art and you walk through UCLA and you look at that $1 billion campus, why are you paying for these buildings? All you need to know is how to use Photoshop. This is giant, this is a $100,000 column. Why are you paying for a $100,000 column? You just need to learn Photoshop. Now, I understand your parents have an idea about college, and that's changing. But it's just the parents are stuck with this thing of if you don't have a degree, you're lost. Nobody has ever given a shit. Nobody's ever given a shit. So, number one, don't go to college. Unless your parents are really wealthy or you don't care and you're like, fuck you and I want to. So that's fine too. Two, get your resources online, and then three, join a community of artists who can benefit you. Now, the one thing that college does benefit, it's still not worth $120,000, but the one thing college does benefit is that you have a community of artists that you can all get good together. So if you're 18 and you're not self-motivated, which I wasn't, then you're not going to be able to do it on your own just because you're not self-motivated. And that's going to cost you $120,000.
That's a big part. Dude, you're mirroring a video I made about my college experience exactly. Like I said, the same thing. I went through the same details. I was the only benefit of college was the social experience and meeting other people that are good at. I agree with you 100%. So
but now you can meet people on Facebook and interact with them. You can make a network of people kind of anywhere. You can meet up make a local group. You guys can all go do art and painting together. Totally. It's just hard to stay motivated when you don't have assignments.
That's why I created Game Dev Underground, because I was a dude in my basement working on my shit, and there was nobody I could work with. So now we have a platform where everybody can meet each other and make games together. So it works out. You can be accountable. You can be let's do this together, and I have to turn in this. Accountability buddies.
And you can still go to local schools here, and I think all those local schools are great. Take a class with a bunch of other people, and then you have to compete and make friends and force yourself to turn in assignments. So that can be still good. And you could take Art Center at night classes too, and here and there. You could sit in on classes, I bet, at some of these schools.
Totally. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with us today, dude. This has been an awesome video, super informative. Thank you for spending the time to do it.
Welcome.
A lot of people are going to benefit from it, and
cool.
It's going to be awesome. So,
have anyone email me if they have any questions or if they want to chat more, and you can find me on Facebook, or we have One Pixel Brush Facebook page too.
You want to shout out your social links and your website real quick?
It's onepixelbrush.com for the website. One Pixel Brush if you look it up on Facebook, and then you can and that's probably the best way to stay in touch of stuff we're doing. And then we have a One Pixel Brush Twitter, and it's all just the exact One Pixel Brush, exactly how it's spelled.
Perfect.
So it's pretty easy to find.
Well, thank you again, dude. I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. All right, see you later, guys. Bye.